Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this absolute beginner's guide to Unreal Engine. My name's Steve Woody, and I'm going to be talking you through this, not just showing you how to do things, but I'm going to be telling you what you're doing and also why you're doing it. And I think this is something that's been missed off a lot of tutorial videos. There's some really incredible tutors out there on YouTube that have done an amazing job at creating content for Unreal Engine, but I think that a lot of people miss the basics. So I'm going to be talking you through this as if you are not a developer, you're not a designer, you don't build games, and that you've never had any experience with coding or visual scripting, and this is your first time touching Unreal Engine. So with that being said, there's a few things you'll need to do. First, as you can see by my screen, I am logged in to the Epic Games launcher. So you're going to have to download the Epic Games launcher, click on Unreal Engine, and you'll start on the News tab. And this just gives you a bit of an overview of what is Unreal Engine and what's going on. Samples is an incredible opportunity for you to download some content. Then you can break it apart, reverse engineer it, use it. It's a really good way to learn. Fab is the marketplace where you can download assets and things that you need either from Epic or from third parties. Your library is all of your Fab library that you've acquired, your projects you're working on, and the engine version. We're going to ignore the last two for now, they're not important. So we click on engine version, we click on the plus, and we get to download the version that we want. The latest is the 5.6 preview, but we're not going to be using that. I am currently using version 5.5.4. Now, it doesn't really matter what version you're using unless there's a huge update to the UI. I'm going to be talking you through the concepts and the core principles in this video. We'll do a few videos with an introduction, and then we're going to transition into game dev, and I'm going to build out a game through this series. But for now, this is just as an absolute beginner, just getting you started. So first thing we do is click launch. What this will do is it will close down the Epic Games launcher, and it will open the Unreal editor. So Unreal Engine will launch for the first time with a splash screen. Now, when this happens, you're going to be given a few options. The first is going to ask you, do you want to use a blank canvas or a template? And also it's going to ask you, what are you building? Are you building games, a film, some architecture, automotive, or simulation? And there are some templates that are set up with some assets for a demo to help you get started. Now, a lot of people will tell you if you're building a game, hey, go straight to third person and download this level or this working demo. It's going to have some code. It's going to have some things set up. And this is great if you want to get started with a baseline, but you're not going to know how this is put together. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to click on blank, and we're going to open a clean, empty project with no code because I want you to understand the basics. Now, there are two options here, Blueprint or C++. Blueprint is the visual scripting language. Visual scripting is basically drag and drop. So using a mouse to drag and drop without knowing how to code. C++ is the language, the developer code that everything runs on. If you're building a blueprint, you will need to compile your blueprint into code, and we'll talk about that later. But ultimately, right now, we're going to start on a desktop with maximum quality and without the starter content. We don't need that. I'm going to leave the project name, but it tells me my location. I'm going to click create. What this is going to do is it's going to shut down the editor and it's going to reopen it inside my project. Now, what this is going to do, if I bring over my File Explorer for Windows here, you're going to see that it's created. I'm just going to minimize this for a second. It's created my project. Now, if I double click on this, you're going to see I've got some folders that have been created, and I've also got this. Now, if I right click on this and drag it to my desktop and let go, it will ask me if I want to create a shortcut. If you just drag it normally, what's going to happen is it's going to create a new version. And then all of these folders are going to start to appear on your desktop. You don't want that. So make sure you right click and drag and copy. Now, what this is going to do is create a shortcut. I can now, at any point, if I was to close this down, reopen it with a single click. This just means that I no longer have to go through that splash screen. And coding is as much about doing it right as doing it efficiently. You want to make sure that you're being as efficient as possible. So this is just a quick way to get started. Now you're going to notice there's a lot of things to look at here. This default editor, and by the way, at any point, if I go to Window, Load Layout, Default Editor Layout, this is now going to reload as the default editor. So everything is as standard. This is how you'll get it out the box. There's a few things we're going to talk about. Before we do that, I'm going to close all of this down. So I'm going to close down these tabs here. And I'm even going to close down this main window. And if I look at this, this is the viewport, which is currently live. So if I want to close this down, I have to click on this blue tab in the top left. It'll open up all the tabs, close this down, and now I've got a blank screen. Okay, so let's just talk about this UI before we go any further. So right now, this is the view for a level. We're designing a level. I'm going to explain what levels are later, but for now, just understand that to create a level, this is what the view will look like. So at the very top, we've got a file, which I can open a new level, or I can open an existing level. I can open any assets, I can save the current level, or I can create a new project. If I click on new project, it's going to take me back to that splash screen. So whenever you create a level, even if I'm creating a blank template, it's still going to open up a default template level. What we want to do is we want to create a new level. Now, before we do that, I just want us to set up our dashboard. So here we can see in the level, there is a toolbar. It says save, open. These are different options, whether I want to select a part of the level, whether I want to build a landscape, build some foliage, build some mesh. All of these things I can build within my level. There's other things I can build as well. And to do that, I'm going to need to first set up this environment. Once the environment's set up, I can then play the level. By clicking this button, I will play this level. And this is going to open up, this is the level. I can move around it. I can use the WASD key, use my mouse to look around. And this is the level. But where does this come from? Well, it's actually preloaded. And to bring this back up, if we go to Window, there's a few things that we want to start with. First is the viewport. The viewport is going to show us the editor. And this is our level, as we can see if we look around it. Also, if I go to the window, I'm going to want to open what is called the outliner. Now, the outliner is going to show me all of the assets that have been added to this level. And you can see there's quite a few things here. There's player start, there's a skylight, there's volumetric clouds, there's a world partition minimap, and all of this stuff you might think, well, what is this? And if I click on any of it, nothing really matters at this stage, because in the window, I also need a details panel. Now I've got a details panel that sits underneath the outliner. And if I click on any of these elements in the world, it will open up a detail panel for it. So I can start to change these details. So this kind of is how a standard level design will look. Viewport on the left, you will normally have on the right at the top your outline or your overview, and then you'll have your details. And everything you click on has its own details panel. Now, I'm not going to go into detail of this panel at this stage. I'm not going to go into detail for the details. But what we're going to do is just finish off this by clicking on Window and opening a content browser. Now, this content browser at the bottom here is kind of like your file explorer. And if I close it, I can reopen it by simply clicking in the bottom left, and it will give me a temporary version. If I click anywhere else, that will disappear. I can also bring that up by pressing Control and Space, and I can toggle this with a hotkey. Hotkeys are your savior. You'll want to learn them. But to get started, this is going to be our loadout. And so this is how we design a level. Now, we don't want this level because, as you can see, it's got all of these assets and all of these folders and all of these things here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click File, New Level. Now, what we currently have is an open world. This is just a standard template. We can also have an empty open world, a basic level, or an empty level. So we basically have two versions and two variations of each version. Do we want an open world or just a single level? Do we want it to be populated with some core content or empty? Well, I'm going to go for an empty level, and we're going to create that. Now, this empty level at the moment, there's nothing here. It's completely black. And so what we need to understand is that first, to get started, we need to build something. Well, in order to build something, we need to add, and we can do that here. We can quickly add things to the project. So, for example, I might want to add a light. And if I go ahead and I add a point light, this is going to put a light into this space, like a light bulb. But there's nothing to see. So if I go to add again, and I go to shapes, and I go to sphere, I'm going to put a basic sphere into this world. Now, if I grab this light and I move it, you'll see that the sphere will start to change based on the light. So depending on the direction of the light to the direction of the object, what you're going to see is you're going to see that the light works. Now, this light is like a light bulb, and that's all we have on this level at the moment. Now, a light is good, but we're going to delete this. Now, we can double click on these. We can change the details of them. We can right click. We can bring up some details like edit, where we can rename. So I might call this light bulb, for example. And this is just a way to structure what you're building within your level. Great. So we understand that so far. Now I'm going to delete the light bulb, and instead I'm going to go back to lights, and I'm going to use a directional light. A directional light is a little bit like the sun. And the reason I say that is because this is a light, like a light bulb, but from a distance, a long way away. And so it doesn't matter what I do in terms of moving it up, down, left or right, it's always going to cast the same shadow. I can change this by clicking here. So within this viewport, I have all of these options. The first thing I can do is use the WASD key to move around. But to do that, I have to hold down the right mouse button. So holding down the right mouse button, I can use the WASD key, and I can move around this level. Now, if I'm moving too quickly, I can use the middle mouse wheel. I'm still holding the right mouse button. And if I zoom in and zoom out, I can change the speed at which I move with my WASD key. This is reflected here in the top right under camera speed. So I can set this. I can also set my scaling options. If I snap to the grid, what the grid looks like, including the position of the grid. And I've got these options here. So this is going to allow me to select, and this is move. So I can move an object. I can move it up or down. I can move it left or right, or I can move it backwards or forwards. There are 3 degrees, and you can see that in the detail panel here under location. So as I move this blue axis up and down, you'll see that number change. If I do it here, you'll also see that change. So I can edit things in the detail panel or live in the viewport. I can also rotate things. If I zoom out, now let's just say I want to click on the light, for example. Now I can rotate this light by simply dragging, and I will change how this looks. Remember, this is a light from a distance. I can also change the scale of the light, or I can change, if I wanted to, the scale of the object. I can make it bigger, smaller, and if I wanted to, I can scale it by absolute positions just to make sure that this is a much, much bigger ball or sphere. Okay, so now we understand the very basics of how to transform based on an X, Y, and Z axes. We can rotate based on an X, Y, and Z axes, and we can scale on an X, Y, and Z axes. We understand the basics. In the top left-hand corner here, there is a menu. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this allows you to see certain things like your FPS and other details of what you're doing here. Perspective allows you to look down from I can look from the top down in more of a 2D format. I can also look in the left here, so I can look at the side view, and this is moved into a wireframe. I can also look from a lit perspective. I can look from a unit perspective. So I've got lots and lots and lots of different options here. I can also go from a perspective. So this is actually looking at it in 3D. So lots of different things I can do with this viewport to see how this looks. And if I want to play the world, I click play, and I'm now in this level. I can move around this level. I can move around this sphere that I've created. And I can do that by pressing the green button or escape or the red button to stop. So now we understand the very basics of how to build out a level. I want to take you to the content drawer. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to add it as a content browser. So this is now permanently on the bottom of the screen. This is your file explorer, very basic. You've got here all, and within there we have engine. Now this is the engine. This is Unreal Engine, and this is all of the templates and the structure and everything to allow you to build to get started. We're going to ignore that. We're not going to touch it. We're going to focus on content. So within the content folder, this is what you're building, your game, your simulation, your environment, everything you're building from here. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to, first of all, just delete that sphere, and we're going to delete that directional light. Now, in order for us to move forward, we have to first add some content. Now, I can click the add button here, or I can right click within the content browser. It's going to ask me if I want to import things into the game, add features or content packs, which can come from the Fab Marketplace or from your computer. I can add a new folder. So in this instance, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this maps, or even let's just call it levels. So now I've got a folder called levels. And within here, I'm now going to save my current level within the levels folder. And I'm going to call this starter level. Okay. Now, a good idea with naming conventions is that you always capitalize the first letter of every word. So I capitalize the S and the L. Everything else is lowercase. And now I've saved this level within this folder. Okay. So if I go back to my content, I've got levels, and in levels, I've got my starter level. This is my starter level. If I was to go ahead and close Unreal Engine and reopen it, let's say I finish for the day, it wouldn't open my starter level. Instead, it's going to open the open world. That's not what we want. We want to always go back to our level that we were working on. In order to do that, we need to go to Edit, and we need to go to Project Settings. There's two configuration, well, there's actually three that we're going to use here. The first is the Editor Preferences. And if I open this, it will open up a new window, which I can maximize, and I can look through. This is all of the settings for the editor. There's a lot to go through here. I can also, if I don't want to maximize this, drag it, and I can add it as a tab so I can switch between the two tabs. I'm actually going to close this because I don't want to use it right now. I'm going to go back to Edit, and we're going to go to Project Settings. Same thing. This one I'll put here, and we're going to click under Project. Now this is where we can give it a thumbnail, a name, a description, all of these details. All I'm interested in at this stage is maps and modes. Edit Startup Map, or the Editor Startup Map, we're going to change this to be our starter level. And the game default map, so this is the map that will be loaded by default when no other map is loaded. Now this has got all of those options that we want to create. There was that blank, if you remember, that blank level. So you can start to scroll through things here. I've actually got the starter level because that's where I'm always going to come back to. So if I click in starter level, so this is going to be my game default map and also my editor starter map. I don't need to do anything else at this stage. I can close this down. So I'm going to close this, and I'm now going to close this as well. When I reopen the project, because of the project settings, it is now going to load my editor with the starter level. So this is getting efficient to that point where you can just double click to open, and you've now got this as a starting point. Good. So now we understand how to get here. Let's have a look at the different things we can add. So if I right click in my content browser, the basic assets that I can add are a blueprint class, a level, a material, or now this is two ways that people describe this. Some people call it Niagara. It's actually pronounced Niagara. So Niagara is a system for visual effects, or for effects that can be added. If you imagine if you're walking through water and there are ripples on the water, that is going to be utilizing the Niagara system. It's where you'll get your visual, your special effects and things like that. We're not going to go into details on this, but just understand that this is something more advanced that we'll deal with later. The three that we're going to focus on right now is the blueprint class, the level, and the material. Now, we've already created a level, And that's our starter level that we have here, where we've created this as a starting point. We can create multiple different levels. Now, you can have open world levels, or you can have different levels. So if you ever play a game, let's use Starfield as a great example. If you've ever played Starfield, there are tons of different loading screens. Okay, it was a running joke in the gaming community of how many loading screens it has. So every time you go into a loading screen, you're effectively loading a new level. So you're going to be transitioning. If you go into a room, maybe you instance the dungeon, maybe you have got into a car, or you've changed the view, or you've completed a level and you've progressed to the next level. You've opened a new map. You've gone back to a main menu. All of these levels can be called upon and need to be built out. So that's what a level is. A map, a level, it's the same thing. So what is a blueprint class? Well, this is where all of the code lies. So what we're going to do now is, in our content drawer, we've got levels. We're going to add a new folder, and I'm going to call this player. Now, if I go into our player folder and I right click, I want to create a new blueprint class. This is going to bring up some options. So let's just quickly talk through these options, because understanding the basics, not only can I tell you how to do things, but you're going to know what you're doing, and more importantly, you're going to know why you're doing it. This is key. So everything within a level, what we just added, that light that we added, the sphere that we added, anything that you add is called an actor. An actor is an object that can be placed within the world. Okay? So an actor is anything. It's a wall, it's a person, it's a car, it's a light. Anything at all that you add into the game is called an actor, whether it's a cloud, the sky, the sun, the wind, whatever it is, it's an actor. A pawn is an actor, but it can be possessed. This means it can receive input from a controller. Now, a pawn could be a car or a boat. It could be anything at all. Anything at all. A pawn is going to be an actor that can be possessed and given controls. Now, a character is a type of pawn, and it includes the ability to walk around. So your character that you play, your playable character, or an NPC, these are characters. Now, if it can be possessed, now an NPC can't necessarily be possessed by you. So you have to understand, are you building an actor? Are you building a pawn? Or are you building a character? Does it need to be possessed? Does it need to be possessed and walk around? And then we have another blueprint called player controller. So the player controller is an actor that is responsible for controlling a pawn. Okay. Finally, we have a game mode base. So this is going to determine the rules, scoring, and other facets of the game type that you're playing. So maybe you have like a free-for-all, maybe you have a limited game mode, but you can have different game modes. I'm not going to go into the other details here. And by the way, if I click on all classes, there are so many different types of blueprints to add. So many. We're not going to do that for now. We're going to leave that. Now, to get started with a blueprint, if you click on blueprint, and let's, for this example, we're going to create a character. Okay. I now need to give it a name. So blueprints typically have naming conventions. You'll start with BP for blueprint _ That way, if ever you see this in a file or a folder, you know BP _ means this is a blueprint. Okay, if you're doing something for example, let's say you're doing something for input mapping, you would call it IM. Okay, for input mapping, or if it's an input action, IA. If it's a blueprint, BP. If it's a material, MA. So you would start to use this naming convention to know what type of thing it is you're working on. Now, this is a blueprint _ and we're going to call this player. So this is going to be the player blueprint. Okay, I can now double click on this to open it, and it's going to open a brand new window. Now, this window is different to the level. In fact, if I take the tab of this and drag it here, this is a level and this is a blueprint. It's a different editor. Let's go back to the level, and now let's right click and add a material. Okay, so I'm going to call this MA _ because it's material, and I'm just going to call this example. Okay, MA_example. I double click on this to open it. And this is the layout for materials. Very different to a blueprint, very different to a level. At the moment, that's all we need to understand. Blueprints, levels, and materials. Nothing else at this stage really matters. Okay, nothing else at this stage. Later on, things like input, we will be adding things like input mapping context and input actions because we're going to need to create those. Also, if you're doing audio or animations and things like that, there's a lot of other things you're going to want to do here. But for now, we're not going to worry too much. Also, user interface. If we wanted to do widgets, like a HUD, like a heads-up display, things like that. Lots and lots of different things to add. For now, that's all we need. So we've got our level blueprint, and this is the layout of it. We have our player blueprint here. So our level, this is our level design, our blueprint, and our material. So we're going to ignore material for a moment. Let's go back to blueprint and let's just talk about this. So slightly different layout. In the top left, you're going to see components. This is effectively your outliner that we had in the level. So the blueprint in the top left has components. And if we look at this, we can see that the first part of the blueprint for player is a capsule component here. This is our viewport. The capsule component is a collision cylinder. This means that if things hit it or if it interacts, if you have two blueprints and they both have different collisions and those collisions overlap, you can create something like an interaction or a state change. Maybe you open a door, or maybe if you have a gun and you shoot someone, this is a hitbox. So the collision is what is required to know that there's an interaction that can happen here. Now, there is an arrow that points forward at the moment, and if I wanted to, I can delete that arrow component, but it's just showing me what way is forward. And then a mesh. Now, there is no mesh at the moment, but I can add a mesh. Now, on the right-hand side here is our details. If I look at our details, I can scroll down to where it says mesh, and I can add a skeletal mesh. Now, here I can add a tutorial. This is part of the engine. If I hover over this, it tells you the path. Engine, tutorial, sub-editor, tutorial asset, character. Okay, so I can click on this and it is going to add a skeletal mesh in a T-pose. But you can see this doesn't quite fit within this collision character. So I need to edit the transform. To do this, I'm going to go -90 to bring it down. And I'm also going to rotate it -90. And what that's going to do is it's going to put it within this box. Now, using the right mouse button to hold it down and the WASD key, I can move around this viewport and I can start to look at what it is that I'm creating. Now, this is going to be very important for you to be able to see. I can also use the Q key to go down and the E key to go up. So WASD goes backwards, forwards, left and right. Q and E goes up and down. And this is how you navigate whilst holding down the right mouse button, okay? So now you can see we've got our character here. Our character is sitting, if we look at this capsule here, and where it is and where it's sitting, we look at this arrow component, we look at this mesh. Now, I don't need that arrow component. I know it's moving forward. I can delete that if I want to. So I just click on it, right click. I can do what I need to do here. Now, this is saying you can't delete this because it needs to have it. Okay, so what can I do? Well, I can add a component. What do I want to add? Well, let's just say, for example, I want to add a spring arm. Okay, so a spring arm, which is part of the camera. And if I add this onto my mesh, so I click on mesh, then I click on add, and I type in spring arm, what this is going to do is it's going to add a spring arm to my mesh. Now, I'm going to rename this to camera boom. I can change in the details on the right-hand side the length. So maybe I want this to be 350. I want it to be a little bit longer away. Okay, now what I can also do, I can drag this either by dragging it here, or I can edit it in the transform. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this at a distance. Now from the camera boom, if I click add, I now want to add a camera. So I type in camera. And what this is going to do is it's going to put a camera at the end of the camera boom. Okay, so we're now going to add this. Now, what you need to understand here, as we're adding things here, so again, I'm just going to go back through and do this again and show you again. I click on my mesh, I click on add, I type in spring arm. That is going to add a spring arm, which I'm going to call camera boom. Now I'm going to click add again. I'm going to type in camera, and I'm going to add a camera. And this is going to be my camera. So the camera is attached to the camera boom. Okay. And if I move the camera boom up, everything that's attached, i.e. the camera, will move with it. If I wanted to rotate this, maybe to pitch it minus 10 degrees, what I've now created is a third person view. So if I play the game, view the lens of this camera, I'm going to be looking at my character in the third person. So let's have a look at how this works. Now we've just added these components. So don't worry, we'll deal with everything else. We'll come back and look at everything else later. I'm not going into details at the moment on this section for the detail section. And we're not looking at the blueprints right now or any of the other things right now. For now, all I want to do is compile. Now remember before, when you visually build something, you need to compile it down into its code. I can also save this. My blueprint for a player is now saved. So let's come back to our level. Well, at the moment, we've got our starter level, but there's nothing in it. We haven't built anything. So let's go up to the actors, use a basic actor that's pre-built. We're going to use a directional light. Okay, we're going to add this. Now, as well as this, I'm going to drag my blueprint, my player blueprint. I'm going to drag this into the scene. Now, I can see this. You can see it here. Here is my player with my camera. And if I turn off my directional light, now I can't see anything. It's pitch black. If I turn the light on, well, my player is now, as you can see, depending on the light and the shadow of the light, I can see this. And if I play this level, there we go. Now that player is going to fall, and they're going to keep falling because of gravity, but that shows it working. Good. So far, so good. Everything works as intended. Well, let's give this level a little bit more life. Way we're going to do that, very simple. We are going to left click up here, and we're going to look at the basics. So we've got a light. We're going to add a skylight. That's going to add a little bit more realism. It's going to add a bit more light outside of the playable area. And if you hover over this and hold Control and Alt, it will give you an example. The skylight captures the distant parts of your level, everything further than the sky distance threshold, and applies that to the scene as a light. This means the sky's appearance and its lighting reflections will match. So we're going to add that. So we've got our directional light, which is our sun, and we've got our skylight to make it look realistic. Now let's go down to visual effects. Well, what do we want to add? Well, the first thing we can add is a sky atmosphere. So now, if we turn off our directional light, it's pitch black. If we turn our directional light on, we now have a sun. That is our directional light. If we turn it off or on, that is our sun. Also, by the way, if I click on this directional light, I can change the intensity. So let's make this, rather than 10 lux, let's make it 100. Well, there you go. You see, it actually turns back to normal because it goes to a standard. But if I do this, it blows it out. Or if I do 1, it starts off dark and gets lighter. So it will come back to a standard, which will be 10. But you can actually start the intensity of this of where you want it to be. I can also change the color of this. And it will change the lighting of everything around it. So this is how we can start to create seasons. This is how we can start to do lighting effects. Now, there are plugins that do all of this for you, but it's actually really good to know how you can build it from scratch. So directional light, you can pretty much do anything you want with this. Now, we're going to go back to standard. And if I want to, I can just click this reset button, do the same here. And now everything's going to be as standard. So we've now got a sun, okay? And that works on this level. And that explains the shadow. Because if I was to take this directional light and I was to rotate it, I actually move the position of the sun in the sky, and that is what affects the shadow on the player. There we go. So now we understand how that works. If I come back up to the quick add, and these are all actors, I'm now going to go back to visual effects, And I'm going to add some exponential height fog. This is going to create the distance between the sky and the ground and make the ground almost look like, well, the horizon. You've got a nice clear horizon now, very simple, very standard. Let's go and add one more visual effect, and this one we're going to place is going to be volumetric cloud. So now we've created some clouds, and basically we have a level. We have a very standard level. So in the editor now, in the outliner, let's right click and create a folder. We're going to call this sky. Within the sky, we're going to put our directional light. We're going to put our fog. We're going to put our atmosphere. We're going to put our skylight. And we're going to put our volumetric cloud. Now, if I turn this off, there goes our world. If I turn it on, that's basically just created a world. Now, if I loaded that template, this was pre-built. I just wanted you to see this as it stands. Now, I can create other things within this world if I wanted to. For example, if I went up to selection mode and changed this to landscape, I can now build myself a landscape. Now, we haven't touched on material yet, and I will do that in a moment. But for now, I need to change the location, the rotation, and the scale. Well, I don't want to make this too big, so let's make it smaller. For now, we're just going to make it 5 by 5 by 5. Okay? You can select the size and everything else, but for now, I'm just going to click create. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a landscape. So I've got sky. I create another folder. I'm going to call this ground. And I'm going to put my landscape inside the ground. I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call this player. And I'm going to put my blueprint for my player inside that folder. So now I've got everything that I need kind of set up here as a starting point. Now I can turn things on and off if I need to, but for now, that's everything set as it needs to be. Now, if I go ahead and press play, you're going to see that I don't fall. I fall down to this point. So by the way, if I just click on this player blueprint that I've got here, by the way, we're in landscape mode, so I need to come back to selection to be able to move this. So now I can move this. So I put that into player. Now you can see not only from this view, but this is showing you what it looks like from the player perspective, from the camera. So I can see this as well. Now if I lift this player higher and I click play, it's first going to fall until it hits this. Now my collision box for my player has hit the collision box for the ground, and gravity has done its job. And so this is why a lot of people like Unreal Engine, because as an editor, a lot of the physics are baked into the engine and they just work out the box. The lighting effect, the shadows, the gravity, all of this can be manipulated, but as out the box, as standard, you can now see it working. Well, let's go a step further, shall we? Let's come back out of here. Let's just bring this back down a little bit so it's kind of sitting on the surface there. And by the way, we can edit this if you want to. Location, we just choose 0. Okay, we can choose 0 here as well. And that is going to relocate this. Now, this has to be a bit higher than 0, obviously. And if I don't want to do perspective, I can click on this and I can go from the top down. So if I zoom out, this is my ground area. And then maybe I want my player to start on the corner. So maybe I want the player to start actually on the corner, looking out that way. Maybe also if I went to the left side and I zoomed in, now I can see where my ground is and where the player is in relation to the ground. So having access to all of this information really helps to be able to build things out and see where they go. I can see my collision box. I can see everything I need. Cool. So if I, for example, was to go into my editor, go to my collision capsule, and I was to change the size of this collision capsule. So let's say I was going to make this 0.5 by 0.5. And let's say I was to make this 0.5. Right, this now, oh, sorry, make this, sorry, 1. I'll leave that as 1 and I'll leave that as 1. Okay, so you can see now what it's doing is it's affecting everything within it. Yeah? So you need to understand how this works. So if I go back and just put that as it was, but inside, let's just change the mesh itself. So I just make the scale of the mesh 0.5. And I actually leave it as 0. Now it's sitting at the top of this. Okay, so now it sits at the top of this collision box. That means if I compile and save this and go back to my level, and I go ahead and I play my level, I'm actually not sitting on the ground. My player is sitting above the ground because the collision box is on the ground, but the player is only half of the collision box. Hopefully that makes sense. Right, and we're going to go ahead and just reset all of this because we don't want to do that. That was all set to minus 90. And then this was also set to minus 90. There we go. So everything's set there as it should be. The collision box is as normal. If I go ahead and compile and save that, go back to my level and play it, and this is now going to be as normal as it was before. So far so good. But what about if I don't like the color of my character? What if I want to change the color? Well, let's just go back to where we started, perspective here. Looking at this character, we opened up by right-clicking a material. If I double-click on this material, I can change anything. This is the view of the material. These are the details. And this is what is known as visual scripting. So I can click on any of these, for example, the base color, and I can change this to red. That, if I click on OK, is now going to be red. This material is red. Maybe I want to give it a bit more of a metallic feel as well. So I make it look a little bit more metallic. Okay, maybe I want to give it a little bit more roughness as well. So it's a bit rough, a bit metallic. I can do that. Now, if I go ahead and apply this, it will save this. Okay, so my MA_example is now this. So if I go back to my player blueprint and I look at my details on the right-hand side, we've looked at transform. But if I scroll down, we looked at mesh, which, by the way, I can change this. So if I want this to be a cube or a person, whatever, I can create new meshes, and we'll cover that in a later video. I'm just using this as an example. We can also see materials, and at the moment it's yellow. Well, if I type in, because I've got the material, so if I go MA_example, if I click on this, it is going to load that material. If I now compile this and go back, I've now loaded this new material. So what I was trying to add is now here. This is the slightly metallic red material, and I've changed the color of that. So by adding these materials, if I go back to content, add a new folder, and I'm going to call this materials. I'm going to go into my player. I'm going to drag this, and I can move it into the materials folder. So all of my materials now live in the material folder. All of my levels and maps live in a level folder, and anything to do with my player lives in the player folder. Now within the player folder, I may want another folder that I'm going to call blueprints. And guess what? My player blueprint is going in there. We're going to move it, and it will copy it across. I also want to create another folder, which I'm going to call inputs. And within here, I can create another blueprint class. But this one is going to be, I'm going to scroll down to input, and I'm going to create what is called input mapping context. I'm going to name this IMC for input mapping context _ player. All right, so that's going to be my player context. Also, I right click and go to input. I want to be able to do an input action. IA_ for input action _ move. Maybe I want another one of these. So I'm going to go for another input action, IA_ jump. Now what I can do is I can start to build out how my player will move, how my player will jump. And so blueprints work alongside each other, and we can call blueprints within blueprints. There's a lot we can do. So before we get too carried away with that, this is just the very, very basics that we're setting up right now. Let's go ahead and look inside a blueprint. So what I'm going to do for now, I'm just going to remove the player blueprint that we've created. I'm going to remove that from this world. It's no longer here. I'm going to go back to my content folder, right click. I'm going to add a new blueprint class, and I'm going to call this an actor. Now I'm going to call this blueprint _ Bool. Very simple. Now, if I double click on this, there is nothing here. I need to add a component. I'm going to create a sphere. There's my ball. I've created my sphere. I'm going to give it a material. I'm going to call it MA underscore. I'm going to add my material. So I have a red ball. I'm going to compile this. Now I've got my collision. So if I wanted to add my collision, I can do that as well. I can add everything I need. And now if I go back to my starter level, I can drag this and I can add this into the level. If I go ahead and play the level, there is my ball, but it doesn't move. It just stands there. It doesn't do anything. There's no gravity because it has no collision. It has nothing on it. It's just static. And that's fine for now. I can leave that there. I don't need to touch it. I don't need to do anything to it. If I went to my, and by the way, I'm going to close this example down now, material. We'll talk about that later. Now we're looking in the blueprint for the ball. So here's my ball blueprint. You're going to notice in the bottom left-hand corner here, there's lots of things here. So there's graphs. Now these graphs are also tabs along here. There's a construction script, which I can close, or if I wanted to, I can double click to reopen. There's also an event graph, which if I close, I can double click here to reopen. If I lose these, I go to window and I click on my blueprints, right? So if I close this window down, I can reopen it with my blueprints. And this is where I can add these. So as standard, we'll have a viewport and an event graph. An event graph has three basic options. I'm just going to delete these comments for now. And we're just going to talk through what these three different options are. So this is the start of visual scripting. The first thing you're going to see here is event begin play. Whenever you start your level and press that green button, this is going to trigger. As long as it's within the level, we have to add the blueprint to the level. So because BP Bool is in the level and we've started this level, everything on this line will play. Event action begin overlap means if you've got your collision, remember we have that collision capsule, if that overlaps with something else, it will trigger this. So when there is a collision detected or an overlap, this will play. We're not going to use this at the moment, so I'm going to delete it. That is a good example if you've got a door and a person walks up to the door and then it pops up and says press E to open the door. That is an example of two collision capsules colliding and an overlap triggering a display and an interaction. That all has to be built from the ground up, and we're going to do that. That's all stuff we're going to do, but not right now. Event tick is when you play your level, it ticks. Say it's ticking at 60 frames per second. So every second you're going through 60 frames. You can trigger things on event ticks. For example, get player location. So on every frame, you know exactly where the player is. This is great for things like hitboxes, great for things like tracking stats, for things like that. Whatever you need to do, you know, triggering world events, progressing the storyline, changing the weather, all that kind of thing can be done through this. So let's have a look at how visual scripting works. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and this is going to add all of the actions that are available for this blueprint. Now it's context sensitive, which gives you what you can use, but you can turn this off and you can just get the full list of every single action possible. There's a lot. I'm not going to sit here and teach all of these. I can't. There is some incredible documentation. There's a lot of great videos. My advice to you is not to get overwhelmed at this stage. Don't try and learn everything. Figure one thing that you want to do and do it. Learn one thing. Learn how it works. Not just how it works, but why it works. Why are you doing it? What are you doing and why are you doing it? Because if you watch a YouTube video and it says how to make your character move, great. You follow it like a sheep and it teaches you to copy paste, great. But what have you learned? You need to know, what am I doing? Well, I'm making my character move. Why? Well, I'm doing this because this does this and this does that. It allows you to start fixing problems, bug fixing, and thinking for yourself. And what you're going to do is you're going to find best practice. Now, you can use AI agents, scripts, whether it's an LLM like ChatGPT or Cursor or an AI agent. You can build out blueprints and C++ code automatically. You know, you can use voice prompts now to build games. But there's still an element of what's called refactoring, or taking code and cleaning it up and making it the best version of itself. Are you using the best process? Now, there's multiple ways to do something. In this instance, though, I'm going to teach you the very basics. So we're going to type in print. That is going to allow us to bring out the good old trusted print string. So for those of you that are not aware, for a developer, print string is a way to debug or test something. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this, and it says print string, I want you to print the word hello. Great. So let's compile this and let's go to our starter level and press play. Well, it doesn't work. Well, the reason it doesn't work is because within the blueprint, we need to connect this up. So event begin play has an execution, and we need to execute this. Now we've connected this. If we compile and go back and click play, now it says hello, but it only stays up briefly. So we stop, go back to our blueprint, drag down, duration, let's change that to 5 seconds. Let's also change that text color to be the same as the ball. There we go. Perfect. Now we can compile and we can go back to our level and start. So now it's hello, but it hasn't changed the color. Okay, but it does stay for 5 seconds. Good. Why didn't it change the color? Because I didn't click OK. Good to know. Also, I can add inputs to this. So if I want to, I can get things. So if I right click, I can start to get different blueprints. I can look at things. So BP, for example, if I want to cast to blueprint ball, or if I want to get something, for example, if I wanted to get a color or something like that, I can grab things from different places and I can bring it in here, and I can do all of that to link it all up. I'm not going to do that right now. For now, I'm just showing you the basics. But if I go here now, this is going to be red and it's going to stay there for 5 seconds. If I connect up the event tick, so let's just close that. Let's connect up the event tick and let's compile and go back and press play. Now it's printing hello on every tick and it's staying there for 5 seconds. So because it's constantly doing new frames, it's constantly going to be printing that all the time. You have to start to consider performance. Now, this obviously isn't going to have a massive impact on performance, but if you start getting lazy and sloppy and you start doing things like this, eventually you're going to eat up a lot of bandwidth. So just bear that in mind. So we're going to go ahead now and right click on this, break that link, and now we have a way to be able to do things. And we can daisy chain this on to do other things. All right, lots of different other things. And this is how we visually script. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Not going to go into too much detail, but just to understand, or just to know that there's a few other things that I want you to understand. In the bottom left-hand corner, we've covered the graphs, and that's what we're doing now. We're in the graph. We can also create functions. Now, I'm not going to go into functions right now or macros. That's more complex. But what I do want you to understand is what is called variables. Now, if I click on the plus sign under variables, I can create a new var or a new variable. I'm going to call this color. Okay. Now, in calling this color, well, actually, let's do something simple to start with. I'm going to call it is active. Okay, is active. So is this active? Now, on this variable in the bottom left-hand corner that you can see here, it has what is known as a Boolean. Now, if you're not a developer, you may not know what a Boolean is. So very simple, a Boolean is a true or false statement. Yes or no, on or off, 1 or 0. It is a way of basically saying, is this true, yes or no? So by saying is active and having this as a Boolean, if I compile, because it says in the details here, the default value, please compile first. Now it says is active and I can check this on or off. So what I can now do is drag this is active to here and get is active, okay? And if this is active and it is true, we can say print to screen, okay? If it's true, print to screen. Compile this and it is set to true. Go back to our level, click play, and it prints. Now, if I come back to my variable and I uncheck this box and I compile and I play the level, it does not print. Okay, so I can do this for event ticks or other things if I want to. All I need to understand is this is a variable. A variable is simply just criteria, something we can store, and we can build this out. And you can go into a lot of depth here. So let's have a look at some of the other variables that are available so you understand them. So if I click on new variable, I already have a Boolean, which we know if we hover over it is a true or false. A byte is an 8-bit number. We're going to ignore that. We're not really going to use that. An integer is a number. Okay. Now this is a number that we can create. And if you hold down Control or Alt, it tells you it is a whole number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, anything like that. Okay. It cannot be fractionalized or decimalized. It is a whole number. So if you need a number, then you would use this. This can be good for locations, coordinates, things like that. Lots of stuff like that. If you're doing rotation, scale, things like that, you can use things like this. This is a 64 integer number. So if you want to do that instead. So this is a float, and a float is a point number. So this allows you to do decimals. So if I compile this, I can now add a decimal point. So 0.1. So 10%, 5%, whatever. This is good for health bars. This is good for when you need a little bit more control. So you can have an integer. An integer is a whole number, and a float is a decimal number. All right, that's it. Boolean, true or false, integer, whole number, float, decimal number. So far, so good. Not going to worry about name. The next one we're going to look at is a string or text. Okay, so string is going to be whatever we want it to be here. So if I compile this, so my string can be text, and it recognizes it as text. So this could be game start, for example. Okay, so now if I rename this to game start text, for example, and I drag this in, get game start text, and I connect this up to the in string. So now if this is active, which we know it is, it will print the game start text, which we have set already as game start. So now if I go back to my level and click play, it says game start. So this is where, now we don't have to get this from here. We can get this from somewhere else. We can get it from a level. We can get it from the game, but we need somewhere to store this text. So variables is a place for you to store information. It's just what information are you storing? And so we've covered the basics. We just stop that simulation. We've covered Booleans, integers, floats, and strings. The other ones that we can add are going to be vectors. We'll do another one for this. So we'll add a new variable for this, and we'll call this one a vector. So if I drag this one in and get this, or even if I want to set this, for example, I need to compile this. So a vector is going to be X, Y, and Z. Now this can be location. This can be transformation, rotation, scale. A vector is 3 points, X, Y, and Z, 3 different numbers. So this can be done for many different things, by the way. We can set this for a color, like an RGB, for example. Lots of different things you can use on this in terms of a vector. A rotator is slightly different. So I've just changed this, so it's gonna edit the blueprint on what I'm doing here. So just ignore that. Instead, if I just delete that and just create a new variable, it's just a lot easier. So this one will be a rotator. Compile this, and now this is going to be degrees. So this is like your pitch, your yaw. So if you're thinking about space and you've got your X, Y, and Z axes, your pitch, your yaw, and your rotation, your roll, sorry, your pitch, your yaw, and your roll. So if you ever play a space game, you'll understand those degrees, the additional axes. That gives you that rotation. We've also got transform. Okay, so this tells you if you hover over them, a 3D rotation. This is a 3D rotation, including translation, rotation, and 3D scale. So if I was to do a new one here, and I was to click on this to be a transform, okay, and I drag this in, and if I go set, now if I was to compile this, all right, now what I get to do, new var 1, location, rotation, and scale. So I can set all of this. So if I wanted to set a player to be in a certain location or set an NPC to spawn in a certain location, I can do this with absolute confidence that that's where it's going to start. All of this is just very basics, but it allows you to see how this all works. So we're going to go ahead and delete everything. And if, by the way, if you delete the beginning parts, it's okay. We're also going to delete all of these variables because these were just examples of how this works. You need to know how it works. So now if I wanted to add something, I can click on add here. I've got variables, functions, anything like that that I want to create. For example, for now though, I'm okay. If I right click on here and I type in event, I can then do event begin play. And now I've added this onto the event graph. So you can see this is no different to a component or like a boom arm on a camera. This is just a child and a parent. So a child and a parent refers to a parent is a top level, and a child, it does everything that the parent does, and it does its own things as well. So this is nested underneath. So this is where the top level control is, and this is the control within it. Same here. So the sphere is going to take its location from the default scene root or from the blueprint Bool. So as you work through, and that's a good example with things like the spring arm and the camera, as you saw as that example before. Cool. So we've now done everything we need to do here. We're going to just go ahead and compile this, save it, and come back out. Now, if I've got, for example, a print string, so let's just go back and add that print string again. Let's connect this up so we know it works. Compile it. If we play this level, it prints out that string. If, however, on that level, I was to remove the blueprint Bool and I was to play, now it will not work because the blueprint is not being called, and as a result, the event is not being played. So you need to understand that you need to have the blueprints in the level in order for the event to take place. Okay, and that also works with overlaps as well. Just with that awareness and nothing else, you now know how to build a basic level, how to create actors and pawns and characters, how to set up a basic level. And by the way, in selection mode, if I went to landscape, now that I've built my landscape, I can do things like sculpt. If I was to sculpt, I can change the size of the brush, for example, to make it much smaller. But I can now do things like I can change, if I just left click, so I can make this, if I wanted to do a mountain, for example, I can sculpt the land. Let's say, for example, I wanted to paint the land. Okay, so now I can add a different color to the land. So I'd need to select the material that I want to use first. So it would need to have a material that would be selected, but I could go ahead and I can paint. So lots of different things that we can do here in order to build out this level on what it looks like, how it works, from sculpting, from painting, all of this inside the landscape tool. Okay, so if I go to layers here and I add a layer, okay, I can add a layer here and I can just have different layers, so I can do things like grass. I can add things and play with that. Now I'm going to come out of landscape for now. We're going to look at foliage. Now, if I had some foliage, I can add it. Now there's nothing here at the moment, so but I can create. If I had some examples of some content, I could add trees, and I can get all of this from the Fab Marketplace. I can then add these into my content folder, and I can then drop them in here so I can build out trees, foliage, all of this good stuff. And this just gives you a great example of how you can build out this basic level from scratch. Let's go ahead now and let's go and do a new project, okay? So you understand the basics of how to build a level, how to do a blueprint, and how to do materials. Now, if we go to a new project and we use the third person, okay, we're going to call this my project 2. We can go ahead and we'll just save everything we did previously. It's now going to close that project down and open up our new project. So now we have 2 projects. If I ever go into recent projects, I can choose between them. But this project, which is a new folder, new project 2, has a load of stuff already built. And if I click on play, I have that third person, which has a skeletal mesh, and I can look around, but now I can also move. I can interact with some of these elements, and they have collisions. We know how collisions work. It also has the jump ability. We also know how the world was built. So if I escape out of this and come back to the viewport, and we have a look at what's been built here, if we go to our content folder, we have characters, which has our mannequin. If we go back to content, we have our level prototyping, which has got our materials, our meshes, and our textures. And we have our third person, which is our blueprint. So blueprint, third person. If I click on this and it opens up the blueprint, we'll look at this event graph. There's a lot more in here. So event received, controller changed. What happened? Cast to player controller. Enhanced input local player subsystem to the target. Add mapping context. This is basically adding the input mapping. This allows us to set up player controls. And I'm going to do this in another video. We're going to set this up from scratch. I'm just showing you what it looks like. Camera input. Triggered. What happens? X value and Y value. Well, if it's X, then it affects the left and the right. If it's Y, then it affects the up and the down. So we can see what happens here, right? And this is enhanced input action IA. Movement as well. Well, we've got, as we can see, different things that we can do in terms of moving left and right, forward and back. Also, if we look down here, how to jump. So we have a button. If it's started, we jump. If it's completed, it stops. These are all things that we can do, and it can all be configured in the character movement component. So if we come back out of this and we have a look, by the way, if I was to close this down, because this can be another tab, if I come back to my level, I have here my game mode, which if I open, this is all of my game mode settings. But I can come back to third person and I've got input, IMC default. Look at my mappings. I've got jump, move, and look. So if I look at input action jump, spacebar, gamepad, or the touchpad. Move. So this is set up for gamepad. It's set up for a mobile device and keyboard. Movement, W, A, S, and D. What happens if I click on W? Well, it does something. What does it modify? Well, look, it tells you all of the settings of things that it does here and what it does and how it does it. So we can map things to do things. This is where we can start to really understand, looking around and things like that, how it all works. So that's the input mapping control set up. So this is how we'll do things. And again, we'll do this in a different video. Actions, well, this is the jump. So again, if I look at this, what happens? Let's have a look at move. So input action move. The value type is on a axis for vector for 2D. Okay, so what happens? Well, basically, it's going to move either plus or minus as a result of this on this 2D vector. So this is where we can start to set what happens. Now, we can change this to make it move faster or slower. We can have boosts and speed ups. There's lots of things we can do within here to allow this to do different things. So input actions, showing you how to set those up and what they are, moving, jumping, looking. We know how to set them up as basics. We know the mapping controls and how they work. And all of that is in the third person, right? Maps, we've got the third person map. That's this. Now, if we look around, we can see this is how it's been built. We also know that this is, if we look on the level, blocks, and if we click on blocks, in fact, if we remove the blocks, that was that block there, look. So we can see all of this block. I can change this block. I can move it up and down. I can edit it. It's just been built for you to make life a little bit easier, right? We can do some pretty cool stuff with this. We can change the sky. So we know we've got all of these different blocks, cylinders. We've got lighting. Turn off the lighting and the map goes dark. We've got our directional light. We know that's the sun. We know how that works. We've got our height fog. We know that. This has also got some post-process volume. We're going to ignore that for now. Sky atmosphere, we know that. Skylight, we know that. It's also got this sky sphere. So different stuff that we can look at and play with, different stuff that we can do. So it's very good to double click on stuff. It will take you to where it is. And you can turn it on or off and see what it does. Volumetric cloud, we know what that does. All right, so that's all good. We know how all of this works. And we can also see we've got our player start. We can see we've got our render and everything else, the ramps and all of this stuff, so that when we're doing this, we're playing, we can move around, we can jump, we can interact. Now, these are going to have collisions on them, for example. If I click on this, this is going to be a cube. Okay, now this is a static mesh actor, but this is going to have a collision attached to it. If I look at our player also has collision attached to it, which is why these things interact with each other. We could have this where if we went into the asset itself, so level prototyping, if we're looking at meshes, we've got this static mesh here. If we look at this and we click on collision, we can add collisions to this. We can add different stuff to this. We can even change the color of this. Remember we had, now if I go MA underscore, we're not going to get that because we're in a different project. But if I wanted to, I could change the material, the type of the material, how it looks, how it works. If I save this and go back into my level, these have now all changed. They're slightly transparent now, but they all work in the same way. So understanding the basics at this stage and how to navigate, that's all we kind of wanted to do. Now, the last thing I'm going to touch on, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, is if I go back to edit, plugins. So a plugin that you might want to add, and there's lots and lots of plugins. Now, you can add third-party plugins. You can add your own. I'm actually going to add one called water. If I click water, and yes, look, there's buoyancy and other things as well. But if I turn on water, I have to restart the project. It's going to ask me, do I want to save everything? I'm going to say yes. It's then going to reopen this project. Now, I'm going to have the ability to add a new actor called water. And there's lots of different parts to this. Now, the thing that I'm going to add, I'll just close that down. I'm going to close down plugins. So what I'm actually going to add here, if I type in add, I'm going to type in ocean. And this is going to add a water body called ocean. And I'm going to drop this into the level. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to create for me water. Now, as you can see, there is this playable area that if I was to go ahead and play, it doesn't quite work very well. I'm now sitting on the ground where this water is. But what it does allow me to have, or allow me to do, is it creates this body of water. Now, I have to sort out this playable area, because as you can see, this playable area, which is the water body zone, that's going to need to be edited, okay? So we're going to have to change that. Because this, as we can edit and change things, by the way, we can do that by transforming things, but as we move things around, you'll see this will affect how the water works within this area. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how this works. You're going to have to figure this out, okay, and deal with this. But by now, just to understand the basics of how this works, you can rebuild these zones, you can do stuff. There are other plugins you can use, there's things you can do. But you can start to create these environments. Now, I would recommend if you're going to do this, you would remove all of the blocks. We're going to remove all of this. We'll remove the playground. We'll remove all of the other stuff. So we've done all the folders. We're going to remove all of this good stuff. Bring this back. So we've just got this basic area. We can remove this water zone. Now, if we do that, it's going to remove the water body ocean. Everything's now gone as standard. So if we now go and add ocean again, okay, we're going to add the water body ocean. Now it's going to be, just takes a few seconds to render. So just give that a second. All right, it's still, we've got that area there, but that's okay. What we're going to do is over here, we're going to add, and this is going to be slightly different. We're going to add a shape. All right, we're just going to do a cube. Now this cube, we're going to transform, and we're going to make it bigger and wider. All right, we're going to change the direction of it. So we're going to make it lower. To do this, we're going to change perspective. And we're going to go to the left view and zoom out. Why? Because now we can see where the water is and we can see where we are. We're very high. So we're going to bring this down so it sits on the water. Okay. So now this is going to sit just on the water, just below the surface. It will go above and below it. Great. Well, that's kind of where I want this to go, like this. Okay, cool. Now let's also look at the player start. Where is the player start? Well, the player start is going to be somewhere else, and I need to move that. It's over here. So I'm going to bring the player start over to here, and we're going to start that player on top of this that we've just made. All right, that's everything that we need at the moment. So let me just go into the top-down mode, because I also want to make sure that it's in the right place where it needs to be. Okay, so there's the player start. Where's that cube that we created? That cube's over here, and that player start is not. So we need to move this so it's over the top of it. So now it's set up in the right place. If I click play, I now start on my cube, and my cube is hovering just over the water. Right, ignoring all that stuff over there for now. Let's look this way. I can jump off of this into the water. I can float underneath the water. It's got some basic, but I haven't got any swim commands. There's no input action for swim. So I would have to build that. I'd have to add animations. There's a lot of other things we would have to do. Now, you can get plugins that do all of this, that do it all for you. But for now, you should at least understand the basics of what we're talking about in how to set up a level and how this all works. Now, there's obviously a lot more to this. This is just a very simple way of us getting started. But if we double click on this player start and we have a look, go back to content, go back to third person, have a look at our blueprints, we can see everything we need here. Maps, we can see everything we need here. If we click on any of this, we can edit it, we can look at it, we can see what we need to do. There's a lot here to set up and to work on. But this gives you a basic understanding of Unreal Engine. So with this understanding, as we move forward now, I'm going to start a brand new project and we're going to build a game, and we're going to do that in subsequent videos. So hopefully this introduction has given you a starting point. There's a lot to cover and this goes incredibly deep. You can spend years learning this. And I don't even know if that's a good use of your time, because whilst it may give you the self-worth and the pride of learning something, I don't know if there's a future in it, because AI is going to automate a lot of these processes. So do you need to worry about learning everything, or can you just use ChatGPT? Well, that's what we're going to do in our video series. We're going to see if we can use AI to build a game with no experience and no knowledge. And I'm going to follow AI exactly. And I'm going to take you through the prompts, the code, the game, and everything we build through a video series step by step. As a completely new user that doesn't know what they're doing, because too many people will assume that you have some experience or some awareness. And I think that steps sometimes get missed. This is going to take you through step by step. So thank you for watching. If it's valuable, please let me know in the comments what you think. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video as we continue on this journey together. Take care for now. Thanks for watching. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.